Welcome to our latest episode, everyone. Today, we have the unique opportunity to sit down with two inspiring figures from the wellness industry. They are the innovative minds behind Sophie, a brand that is redefining the space of natural formulations and herbal remedies. Joining us today are Kaveh Memari. He's the founder of, he as a co-founder has leveraged technology to reimagine the potential of herbal medicine. And Pamela Spence, a botanical expert with a deep understanding of the health benefits that plants can offer us. Together, they've created products that not only work to improve sleep and boost mood, but also champion sustainability and ethical sourcing. This conversation promises to be an enlightening look into the world of alternative medicine, the transformative power of plants, and the future of wellness. Well, this is a very exciting topic, and it really fits in well with what we're doing here on SiteGrid. So I'm grateful for you, Kaveh and Pamela, for joining us today. But just to kick this off, could you just give us a quick snapshot of your background, your trajectory in life, and how you ended up doing what you're doing? Let's hear it first from Pamela.
Thanks so much for the invitation. Really, really happy to be here. So as you said in your intro, I'm a medical herbalist. So that means that I've spent 4 years studying standard anatomy and physiology, the same as you would expect from a medical doctor. And I work with plants in a clinical setting, so working one-to-one with patients. And medical herbalists are the only profession that is allowed to work with plants from growing them to making the medicines to actually seeing them work in their patients, so the full arc. I also write a lot. I speak in the media about plants, and I'm always trying to raise awareness. And it was a happy coincidence to get in touch with Kaveh and to be able to be involved in the product development of Sophie. My actual background is that I come from the world of film and television. So my first degree was in theatre, film and TV. And I noticed how people often got very burnt out and stressed out working in those industries, and often left when they were just getting into their 30s. And that was me too. I really couldn't keep going at the stress levels I was working at, and we never had time to go to see a doctor. So I became interested in alternative and complementary ways of looking after myself, and that grew into a passion, which grew into my next degree. And now I've been working at that for nearly 20 years.
Exciting trajectory. Thanks for sharing, Pamela. And what about you, Kaveh?
So firstly, very grateful for the opportunity to share our story with Sophie, with you. And look, I've had the privilege of working with amazing people like Pamela and another 30, 40 makers from ethnobotany to industrial design, bringing to life Sophie over the last 2 years. My own background is that I typically am involved as a founder, working on companies that either have no technology, no team, no capital, very little, usually as the first person in or full number one. And we typically start the process of inventing. And what was so exciting about Sophie and bringing Sophie to life is we thought there was a real opportunity to look at the entire user experience that we have when we try to get a benefit from a plant. It's either extremely difficult to understand the imperceivable small changes. It's also hard to know what's real. It's also hard to know what's snake oil. It's also hard to know what specifically impacts us. And we set out on a journey that involved everything from industrial design to ethnobotany, from medical herbalists to clinical physicians. And we started to really think, if we had to reinvent plants and reconnect people and plants, what would we have to build? And now, 4 global pilots later, we are just activating this platform. So we're very pleased to be sharing all about what Sophie is, and excited to tell you more about it.
Yes, my first question to you, Kaveh, is it's kind of, for lack of better word, it's kind of like a saturated market, as Pamela have alluded to earlier. Herbal remedies have probably been around for a very long time. So how has technology provided new opportunities to enhance herbal medicine, especially at Sophie?
That's a really good question. And I think it goes down to what Sophie fundamentally offers that isn't in the market at any price point through any service provider. Mm-hmm. And that is right now the way we work is we have standard formulations, and how they specifically impact you or me or Pamela, we don't really know, but we generally understand how they impact people. And although we've used these plants for thousands of years and we know they're relatively safe, it's always very difficult and very personal to discover which one works for you. The question that Sophie set out to do wasn't yet to find a cool way to sell valerian, passiflora, or ashwagandha. We know these plants are amazing, and if they're sourced correctly, they have a huge ability to impact human health. The question that Sophie set out to answer is the one that specifically works for me. How much and when? And that is a question that is extremely difficult to work out with a journal, with a pen and a paper, and self-dosing on a tincture. And this is the process that we set out to do. And in the way we think about it at a super high level, think about the way music was before Spotify. We promoted artists as great artists. But what Spotify did is they built a technology layer around the listener and allowed them to tell you what was great music for them. And that's how they discover new music. It's very personal. The listener is at the heart. With Sophie, the pioneer, which is what we call our customers, is at the center of the Sophie experience, not the formulations. And Sophie acts as a technology layer around the pioneer and maps their unique responses to each of the medicinal plants designed for targeting different pathways of sleep or calm. That's what makes Sophie very different. We're not in the business of selling formulations and seeing what marketing claims we can make with them. And we're in the business of providing a means for someone to discover the plant that works for them. This is maybe a very different way of thinking about how this industry is currently manufactured, marketed, and sold. I hope that helps a little.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Kaveh, for making to us clear what makes Sophie distinct from other products and services. Now, Pamela, if you could just share to us how plants are beneficial for human health.
Sure. I think the thing that most of us are unaware of these days is that the last big statistic that we had from the WHO, which is it's a few years old now, is that they thought that 80% of the world's population were still relying on herbal medicine for their primary health care. I feel like when we live in developed countries, we become very complacent about what we have access to. And sometimes we can, have an attitude of looking down on plant medicine. So I think that statistic of 80% will now be a bit lower, but certainly the large volume of the population on Earth is relying on plant medicine. Plant medicine is in every place there has ever been human beings. So for me, it really belongs to all people and it belongs across all times. We all have a relationship with plants. And plants are not just given medicinally, of course. Look at the huge market at the moment in plant-based food. So plants taken in some formats are foods, take more of those in a stronger way, and they become medicinal in their action on the body. So, we can't have health without plants would be my argument, of course. If you think about it as well, many pharmaceuticals are derived from plants. And if you look at where big pharmaceutical researchers are sent to, they get sent to the Amazon. They're looking for what's the next thing in the plant world that we haven't discovered yet. So I would say that they are incredibly important for human health.
And I think a lot of people would also ask you, Pamela, if there's an obvious benefit from using herbal remedies over pharmaceutical products. I mean, we're quite accustomed to, when you have a headache, you take Nurofen straight away. You don't look for any other, herbal products.
Sure. Okay, so the first thing I think it's really important to say is that both types of medicine have their place. Mm-hmm. And it's not about one being better than the other. It's about what is most appropriate for the person standing in front of you who needs the help. That's what I absolutely love about Sophie, is that it puts the person in the middle. So we're not trying to sell or push plant medicine over pharmaceuticals. We're saying, what does this person in front of me need? As a medical herbalist, that's what I do in my clinic. If I feel the person should go back to their doctor, that's what I tell them. If I feel like I can help them, that's what I do. So I'm quite well known for saying, if I have a heart attack, please, for goodness sake, don't take me anywhere near a herbalist or someone punting herbal medicine, because I need pharmaceuticals at that point. I need to go to a hospital. So I think that there are, I think both are necessary. I think it's about the appropriateness of the situation. But look, the way that they work is that pharmaceuticals tend to be one single chemical that goes into the body and takes over function. And sometimes we absolutely need that. Herbs are very different. So herbal medicines contain maybe 200 to 300, sometimes more chemicals within them. They're much more complex. They do not have the ability to go in with that laser sharp focus of the pharmaceutical and take over body function. What they're there to do is to support the body to function better by itself. So the other thing that tends to happen, because you're not taking a single very strong chemical in a high dose quite often, is that you'll find that within those 200 to 300 chemicals, there are some very active ones. And sometimes they can cause some problems for the body, but very often, not always, but very often within that plant, you can find the other, the antidote to that problem within the plant. So it's almost like often the plants will be covering their own side effects, if you like. When you take one chemical out and do that separately with a pharmaceutical, you more often get problems. And the third thing I would say is that it is extremely unusual, if not impossible, to become physically dependent upon plant medicine in the way that you very much can with pharmaceutical medicine. So for me, they're not always the correct choice. It's always about the person in front of us, but they do have some distinct benefits.
Now, I hear what you're saying, Pamela, but I think a lot of people would also be asking is whether we can really rely on herbs, because there is little research on the benefits of these herbs, and they don't usually perform on randomized controlled trials. So what would you say to skeptics? And probably we can hear it from Kaveh.
That's such an important question, because for us, when we set out on the Sophie journey, it was absolutely critical that we built Sophie on a foundation of science. And so the first thing we actually did, it took us about 6 months, was to read all the peer-reviewed journals on the pharmacological pathways of sleeplessness and anxiety and the plants that target them. And we had to review nearly 1,000 journals. And when we summarized all of our research on that subject, we could summarize it to one sentence: the science is thin. And the disappointment on that is also a function of what we're capable of doing. If I find a randomized controlled trial of a bottle of valerian, it's like saying that tonight I'm going to have a wonderful dinner with a bottle of grapes. It's extremely difficult for me to replicate that particular vintage of red wine that I particularly love, because the level of understanding that we have of plant medicines, even when it comes within the scientific peer-reviewed space, is sometimes extremely limited. So these studies become extremely difficult to replicate. But I don't think it's the fault of the plants. I think it's the fault of the studies and the way we've studied these plants. So we should never allow the limitations of the tools we've had to define what we think is the potential of the outcome. One of the things we've loved about Sophie is how it builds on that science forward. And there were things that Pamela told me, and I kind of nodded my head. I was like, sure, but of course you're a medical herbalist, you would say that. Like, everyone's a bit better after you take away the plant than they were before they had the plant. Or, an effect within 10 days. And when we started to do our global pilots with real world, in the real world setting, not a randomized controlled trial, but genuinely people using the product every day in their real life, going around journaling how it really makes them feel, we started to see some of the things that were in deep practice because it had survived hundreds or thousands of years of practice. It had become good practice, not because it was malpractice. It had become practice because it worked. But there was never the science to capture why it worked. And the way we asked those questions were never adequate to explain why, with a 1% knowledge of the living world, we can't explain why the cause and effect of something so complex is. But what we started to see, for example, in our very first study of valerian with 300 pioneers in 14 countries, we found that actually the baseline of the pioneers of how they felt and slept after they used valerian for 30 days was higher than before they started using the plant. There was no basis for that. They were no longer taking a plant. So we started to find scientific, real-world, mathematical proof for the practice that is medical herbalism. And for us, that's super exciting. And it's probably why we're excited to work with amazing scientific partners like the Royal Botanic Garden, Kew, and so on, because we're super interested in pushing the science of plants forward with Sophie and not just simply marketing around lifestyle or how cool our Instagram account is. Although I'm sure it will be a very cool Instagram account when we go live.
Yes, and it's good that you actually addressed the sort of replication crisis, because it's actually not just unique within the within the field of herbal medicine. You can also find that in social sciences, in psychology, for instance. It's quite notorious for
Absolutely.
having replication crisis. But just to carry on our conversation about science, Pamela, would you clarify to us how herbal medicine is different from homeopathic medicine? Because I suppose that when people hear herbal medicine, they automatically assume that they are the same thing.
Yeah, most of us herbalists would really like to have a t-shirt saying I am not a homeopath. I have nothing against my homeopathic colleagues, but we are very distinct. So thank you for giving the opportunity to clarify that. So while homeopathic medicine and herbal medicine are both seen as complementary to or alternative to perhaps mainstream medicine, we are coming from a completely different philosophy. We both use natural products, so herbal medicine only using plants. Homeopathic medicine uses minerals as well, and sometimes animal parts too. The idea of homeopathic is that you give an infinitesimally tiny dose of the thing that is causing you the problem. So a really good example of that, for example, would be apis, which is a really well-known homeopathic remedy. So they would give a tiny, tiny, tiny dose of bee venom when you are having the kind of effects of a bee sting, so something raised and sore and red. And the idea is that the information contained in the remedy will make your body start healing the problem. Okay, so that's like cures like. Herbal medicine is not that. We are allopathic. Allopathic medicine, often people think it means pharmaceutical medicine or modern medicine. It doesn't. It means giving the opposite to cure. So if you come to me and you are too hot, I will give you something which is cooling. Just as you would expect, if you have a fever, you take some kind of pharmaceutical to bring it down. So we're giving the opposite to affect the body. And what we're doing is not giving a tiny, 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 tiny dose, which some people say it's almost not even there in the homeopathic remedies. We are giving you plants in a strong dose, as you would expect, to help the body through the healing crisis. So I hope that that's helpful, because the homeopathic medicine, so herbal medicine goes back to there are archaeological digs from the times of ancient Egypt and even before, Stone Age burials and things like that in the United Kingdom, where we find evidence of herbal medicine being used. It is as old as we are. And what's really cool about that is that some of the remedies that they were using from these archaeological digs, I'm still using today. That's what Kaveh said about this is proven through time. This is empirical science, science in the real world rather than in a trial form. Homeopathic medicine was only actually invented in the last century. It's really quite new, and it came out of Germany. So completely different things, but both using natural products in trying to support people's health.
Absolutely. And again, it goes back to what you were saying earlier. It's all about giving people choices, finding out what works for them. So, Kaveh, what insights have you already discovered at Sophie that you are willing to share regarding the relationship between humans and plants?
Well, it literally feels like we're glimpsing over a horizon of the discoveries we're going to make. The first discovery, the very first signal we got out of Sophie was a little bit mind-boggling, because we had 300 valerian pioneers around the world. We gave them one valerian extract, and we got 300 different responses. So it wasn't like there was 10 kind of similar responses. Literally, people's responses were as individual as them. And it was super interesting to see that even though we could see a general herd improvement, but that general improvement was hiding very personal responses to each of these plants. And it was incredible to see when we did the second program with Passiflora, that there were people who responded to one plant, but not the other, or people who responded to both, but at various amounts. And it was also interesting to see that people are not these kind of static creatures that don't change. that people themselves change over time. For example, I have horrendous hay fever allergies. I'm not myself every summer. So people change. Plants are natural. You've got two organic things trying to meet and make a difference on each other, which means that a one-off discovery does not also mean that it holds forever, which is why it's so important to have a live feed when you reconnect people and plants. And that's what Sophie does. So I would say the very first discoveries we made was incredible to see how individual responses were. It was also incredible to see that within 10 days, for half of the pioneers, we could have a statistically significant observation of effect or non-effect. It was interesting to see that after the plant treatments were over, that the baselines were always higher before than after, as Pamela had always suggested they would. And it was interesting to begin to find mathematical proof as to why plants are not only an integral part of our wellness or our human health, but they're probably how we can fundamentally change the way we approach human health, in the sense of the current approaches we have are primarily disease management. And they're very good for dealing with you when you're broken. But plants have this amazing possibility to have a life enhancing experience for the duration of living and not just the disease state of life. And seeing how people can self improve, seeing how we could impact energy, seeing how we could impact focus, seeing how we could impact how calm or how much sleep we get, that's quality of life improvement. And you know what? 8 billion people sleep every night, or try to anyway. It's in a big addressable market. So if we can do that with less valerian, benzodiazepam, and SSRIs, that feels like a much more long-term sustainable relationship as part of our wellness. So we're super excited by the first signals from Sophie. Absolutely.
Thank you, Kaveh. And since you mentioned some of those fancy sounding plants, I think this is a good segue to ask Pamela, what's the current roster of plants that Sophie's working with, and what are their benefits?
Sure. Well, we looked through all of that research. Actually, the research that had been done all came to me to look at. And from that research, I used my clinical experience to pull together the Sophie top 10 of plants. So at the moment, we have my three top plants, which I think as a clinician will hit the mark for the most people. And those are the ones that we have been trialing in our Sophie program, Pioneer program, over the last couple of years, are valerian, passion flower, or passiflora, as we call her, and ashwagandha, which the Latin name is Withania somnifera, the clue being in the surname there. Then we have other plants like hops and chamomile and lemon balm and lots of others in the pipeline. But let me just say something about those top three. If your listeners aren't so familiar with herbal medicine, it's just a jumble of names, really, isn't it? So valerian has been used for, thousands of years to support with anxiety and also with sleep. It's the root of the plant that we use. And it actually has been shown to help support GABA, which is one of your neurotransmitters, one of the chemicals that sends messages in your brain. So really, we're trying to target those neurotransmitters when we're working with sleep and anxiety. GABA is really important there. You've probably also heard of serotonin as well. I'm sure your viewers will have heard of that. And so what we want to do with these plants is or one of the mechanisms in which they work is that they try to make sure you have more of those neurotransmitters sloshing around in your brain if you don't have enough, because if you don't have enough, you will tend towards anxiety and your sleep regulation may not be very good. And once these chemicals have been released into the brain, they tend to be reabsorbed really quickly. So the plants also try to slow down this reabsorption. So essentially, you have more of the feel-good chemicals sloshing around. And the two key ones that we work with these plants is GABA and serotonin. And actually, valerian's even been shown in one study I was reading recently to plug the melatonin receptors. And I'm sure your audience, so in the UK where we are right now, we can't buy melatonin over the counter, but you certainly can in the US, and many people who have sleep issues will be buying that. So we know that valerianic acid in the valerian can plug those receptors too. So this is the level at which we're talking about the plants. working. And so the valerian, the passiflora, and the ashwagandha, they all interact with GABA and serotonin. We have this extra bit with valerian, but they have different characters. So when I'm talking and teaching about plants, I kind of think of them as, and Kaveh will laugh, because I think of them as personalities. So I think of them as being people. So valerian is the person that comes along when you are absolutely stressed out of your head and you cannot relax and you cannot settle and you cannot sleep because you are so anxious, and just says, it's all going to be fine. It's quite deep and rooty. It has a very grounding effect on people, so it's very good for people who are really anxious and moving and can't sit still. The passion flower, for me, in my clinical work, is the one where the anxiety is perhaps not so high, but where you've really lost the rhythm of your sleep. So people who have, maybe who are working shifts, maybe who they just have this pattern of insomnia, their sleep pattern is not right. It's very good for anxiety too, and it can really settle the pattern down. And the ashwagandha, this at the moment, I'm seeing it, it comes from the Ayurvedic tradition of herbal medicine, from the Indian tradition. And it's starting to come out into the market in products from coffee to sleep drinks to all sorts of things. It's really starting to, because what herbalists have known for many, many years is that it helps to support the adrenal glands. And the adrenals are working extra hard if you have had long-term stress. So if someone comes along to me and they've had a lot of long-term stress, or their adrenals are taking on a new job, which happens very much to women around menopause as well. So women entering sometimes even before 40 can start to notice that their adrenals are working a little bit too hard. Ashwagandha brings this nice calmness. It's very good for people who overthink things, but also it's helping with adrenal depletion. And I would argue that anybody living a standard modern life is pushing their adrenals harder than they should do. And newsflash, if you're a caffeine person, then you're poking them with a knitting needle while you're doing that. So I think probably most people could benefit from a bit of ashwagandha in their lives.
So is that the most the one with who has the most calming personality?
Which has the most calming? I think that valerian kind of takes you by the shoulders and makes you sit down. Passiflora is a vine. It's a very beautiful plant. So it kind of comes in around the side and you don't notice it so much. It kind of, you're calm a little while later and you didn't really notice the way of getting there. And the ashwagandha is calming for the full day. Is kind of the way, it's kind of there to support you in all the stress that you have in your day. That's how I would talk about those three particular plant personalities.
And Kaveh, could you please elaborate more on the science behind the instant mood boosting effects of functional fragrances? I understand you also have that in Sophie. So how do they work, and how do they work for the body and mind?
It's super interesting because, you know, as you're asking this question, we are just completing our first real world study of functional fragrances. And this one has happened with 300 pioneers purely in the US. So it's our first pioneer program purely in the US. And whereas in the case of valerian, passiflora, ashwagandha, there's a huge tradition. So the only question that we set out to find out was, we weren't trying to prove whether valerian, passiflora, ashwagandha works. We were trying to work out which one works for me more than works for Pamela or for you. The functional fragrance program is different. We have this amazing partner. They've been a 128-year perfume house. So they create products that 4 billion consumers use and they've never heard of them. And for about 20 odd years, they had been developing these things that we're calling functional fragrances. So we know, I'm sure your listeners will be mindful that a scent has this incredible transformative effect. It also is very close to memory, and it can sometimes take you back, like a smell of a certain thing can remind you of your grandma or something like that. I certainly can have a few of those. And so they can really transform us, and they can also transform our mood. We've known luxury fragrances and we've known aromatherapy, but functional fragrances sit somewhere in the middle, where effectively the idea is whether or not it's possible to mood modulate. They're not words we would really use, but change the way we feel. And the first program we worked on was focus, but actually we found out it had a huge effect on calm and sleep as well. So I think for us, this is really at the forefront of science. It's at the forefront of what we know how to use this technology. But the way we see it is, whereas you have a relationship with plants that are gentle and over time, we wanted something that would hit us faster than caffeine would enter the blood barrier. And for us, that's through the nose. And of course, the only consistent element, I suppose, is that they are natural plant-based. And we're taking the power of the plant again to transform the way we feel and the way we operate, and nudging okay to something better than okay. In this case, what I found in my own use of focus was a few less glasses of, Nespresso shots during the day. And I also found that I didn't need to use Mr. Ford so often, because I replaced her with Miss Sophie. But from that point of view, we think plants have this huge potential. Our responses to them seem to be entirely unique, idiosyncratic, individual to who we are. And how cool that for the first time we can actually Spotify and develop our own playlist of calm and sleep with plants, taking what Pamela's been doing for a long time, even before Pamela, and democratizing it for accessible to all. But yeah, functional fragrances, watch out. There's a few very interesting bits of research coming out on that in the next 6 weeks.
And if I could just add to
Yeah,
what
sure.
Kaveh said there, what's really interesting for me as a clinician as well is to watch how people, when you think of focus, a lot of people automatically think of caffeine. So how can I get on top? How can I get the adrenaline flowing? But what happens there with the functional fragrance is that you get the focus. What Kaveh experienced was that he therefore needed a little bit less caffeine. And what you're going to notice at that point is a positive impact on your stress levels because you have less caffeine around.
Absolutely.
And a positive impact on your sleep. So you pick one point which you can enhance how your body is managing, and then the knock-on effect into all the other areas begins. So you can, and also, of course, by looking first at our sleep, as we've been doing with the mouth sprays, then you find that your focus is also better. They all play off each other.
And that's what was so interesting. I mean, we're not looking for a sleep result when we did the focus study, but it was right there. Both how solid people slept and the quality they described for their sleep was beyond 95% level of certainty, above the baseline experience they had. And we were just like, we couldn't understand how focus could have an impact on sleep. But that is a fantastic connection there, Pamela.
And that is holistic health, right? Right there.
Yeah, sorry. Which actually leads me to the next question, talking about sleep. Because one thing that you also do in Sophie is you encourage people to track their sleep and mood over time, and you have an app to do that. So would you like to talk more about that, Pamela?
Sure. So the benefits of tracking, so we have several different interfaces going on. So sometimes when we talk about Sophie, especially when I'm involved, it's all about the plants. And then we forget that it's not just all about the plants, it's also all about the mathematical mind that's behind Sophie as well, which is picking the correct plant for the person. But it's also about the app where you are tracking and you are every day you're noting down how your sleep is through a very simple and very beautiful interface. So we can see the baseline of how you've been before you start using Sophie, and then afterwards we can see the changes. We can see whether the plant is good for you or not. For me, so there's a reason why we need to collect that information so that the Sophie brain can work out for you which is the best remedy for you, and we stop guessing. Which is what people do up to now, really, is just guess, unless you have a medical herbalist on hand. But there aren't so many of us around. So it's a bit like having a medical herbalist in your pocket. But also it focuses you in on tracking these things, because quite often we know we have a problem, but we're not actually focused enough to think about that problem every day and to compare it. So we end up spending huge amounts of money. I have a lot of people contact me on social media or come to the clinic, and they come with bags sometimes of things that they bought. They try it once or twice, but because they don't have a feedback mechanism for how it's working, and because some things take a little bit of time, they buy something, try it for two, three times, and then they shove it to the back of the cupboard and they never look at it again. So they have full cupboards, empty wallets, and nothing's got any better. But what this does is says, look, let's focus in on how you're actually feeling. You take this remedy for these many days, and let's actually literally track it. The other thing that it does, so it brings a bit of a the word that's coming to mind is mindfulness. It's not quite the word that I want, but let's just say it's checking in with yourself. We also have the Treehouse, which is this incredible community which Sophie pioneers. That's what we call our Sophie users, if you like. We are all in there together. You have discussions going on from the team. You can ask questions. People support each other. And for me, it's been quite incredible to watch the Treehouse from the first time we ever posted, you know, hi, I'm Pamela, and this is my role in the team, or hi, I'm Kaveh. As everybody has joined us, this incredibly supportive community has come together, and quite often now they're answering each other's questions. They're tagging us when we need to be brought to our attention. But there's something that happens when you bring a group of people together and they support and help each other. So they're swapping tips. They're chatting about what's worked for them. People are coming in saying, I'm new to Sophie. I don't know what I'm doing. Someone else will show up and help them. There's something about feeling like you're part of something, which also supports the human condition, doesn't it? Because anxiety and lack of sleep is an incredibly isolating experience and ratchets up our stress levels. So for me, every touch point that Sophie has is this incredible holistic situation. This is not just about, we have a plant spray product, buy it and take it. It's not that at all. It is about learning together, and we are very open, Kaveh, especially with things going on with the team, what we're struggling with, what we're learning, sharing in that, and it does really feel like we're growing something together.
And you know, Pamela, if I could build on that, we have this amazing member in our team on our scientific advisory board, Dr. Dahmer. He's an integrative physician. He's so cool. He's a family GP, Mount Sinai, Brooklyn. And for years, he lived with the Navajo, and he lived with the Maori, and he understood their methods and systems of care. And we were having a chat, and he said one of the things he loves about Sophie, in his words, was that it combines different systems of care. So we know each one of these has their role. For example, we know journaling is an intervention. That's a medical term. We would never use it, but it's an intervention because becoming self-aware of how you feel over time is itself a kind of, not necessarily therapy, but almost the first step of understanding how something is affecting you. So we have journaling. We know empathy is its own kind of intervention. And he said, we know patients who care for patients walk out of hospitals faster. We know even animals show empathy to each other in clinical trials because it's a living thing. If you've ever been processed by an expert doctor who showed you no empathy, and you walk out of that clinic, and it's not their fault, they're under a lot of pressure, but you feel totally unresolved, you know what great empathy means. Or if you meet an amazing nurse who gives you empathy, even though you haven't been cured, but you feel better. So we have journaling, we have empathy in the treehouse. We have these amazing plants, which Pamela is a great champion for, as is the thousands of years of tradition across all the various cultures in all the different ways they've come. And of course, at the end of it, we have you. And what I mean with that is, think about how many products at CVS were designed around you. Think about how many of those products thought about your impact before they wrote their dosage. Probably not many, maybe none. Because the way the industrial revolution required, we had to create standardized products and figure out how many people we can give these standard products. It was good for some and not good for many. What we can do by adding you into this equation is we can, for the first time, actually create regimens or treatments. Maybe that's a big word for us, so let's stay away from that. But fundamentally make recommendations in the same way, again, going to the Spotify analogy of, I don't know half the artists in my playlist anymore. I just love the music. And I don't think you should be a medical herbalist or an ethnobotanist to get a benefit. So the fact that we invite basically journaling, empathy, plants, and we put you at the center of it, I think is something that makes this a system of care that isn't like too many things we've seen in the market yet. So we're super grateful for what it will do. We're very excited by Sophie's promise. That's
I could hear your excitement, Kaveh, and the way it sounds to me is that you're really trying to be adaptive and responsive to the need of the market. So I'm just interested to hear from you, Kaveh. What's the roadmap like for Sophie? I mean, our needs, our lifestyles keep on evolving. There's the pandemic, there's the AI, there's the
Yeah,
popularity of remote working. So, what kind of wellness issues do you see yourselves tackling, and which plans in the coming years? And
for sure.
also, when is Sophie available, and where can we find it?
Absolutely. Look, when you start something you've never built before with a team that wants to do it, you need a mission that really binds people. Sleep and stress were pandemics pre-pandemic. In the US, we knew there were about 50 million who couldn't sleep most nights. We know there were 40 million that were affected by anxiety. And by the way, these aren't two perfectly separate groups of people because there's an overlap. So we knew that the number of people affected by it was huge, sleep and stress. So we set out to activate Sophie as a platform very much focused at sleep and stress, which is the plants that Pamela has been talking about. We think there's additional opportunities beyond sleep and stress. For sure, focus. If anyone has done 9 Zooms today, they'll understand the difficulty for focus on the 6th or 7th Zoom. Energy. If you're going between caffeinating and drinking things to keep you going, the need for maybe less of those. We have hard lives and we don't necessarily give ourselves the opportunity to restore and recover. And what that means is we cumulatively build a lot of stress, we build a lot of lack of sleep. And for us, those areas are the ones we want to go to, the plants we have talked to. And in terms of availability, we know that we are activating pre-orders from the 1st of September. We know that first customer shipment will happen in the UK in November. We've been already running pioneer programs in the US for 2022 and 2023. So we intend to be available in the US imminently. And for us, because we'll have very limited capacity to manufacture, we will do it on an honor basis, on a first come, first serve pre-order basis. But we're building significant capacity to respond. And from our pricing point, it was really interesting. We're trying to figure out where we should price it because we don't really have a peer to be cheaper or more expensive of. And so the view that we've taken is we want to price this as low as we possibly can in order to get it in the hands of as many people as possible. We hope that word of mouth is going to be the way that Sophie is shared. So for us, our pioneers are the champions and the ambassadors who will take the narrative of Sophie forward. And I hope channels like this will also help us also amplify the message. But Sophie.health, which is the URL, we will post more on exactly when the product is available. But we certainly love to see as many of your listeners on there as possible.
Yeah, the link will be on the description note. But Pamela, let's talk about the S word because a lot of people are concerned about sustainability. So how do you ensure that plants you use are sourced sustainably and ethically?
Sure, that's really important. So one of the first meetings that I had with Kaveh when we were kind of figuring out whether we wanted to work together or not, as you do when you first meet and talk about a project, one of the first things that I talked about was the fact that sustainability is incredibly important to me. And it is in all of the companies that I agree to do product development with. And one of the things that I liked about Kaveh was that he immediately jumped on that bandwagon and was like, absolutely, we have to make sure that we are not just interested, however, at Sophie in the fact that the sustainability of the plants, we also want to know that the people in our supply chain are properly treated as well. And those two things are not the same. And very often you will notice that some companies who are all about sustainability of plant are not worried about the conditions of the people who are involved in the supply chain. So when it comes to herbs, the supply chain is extremely complicated. And the reason for that is because often plants are seasonally picked by itinerant traveling populations. And so it's very difficult. So if you look at an industry like tea, for example, it's not hard to know the sustainability of the land and the plant, but also how the people are treated because they tend to come from a tea garden. Tea gardens don't move around, they are there. Whereas we have, for example, one of our herbs coming up in the future, lime flower, for example, is mainly picked by itinerant populations in Eastern Europe, and they will come and they will pick a couple of bags and they will hand it over someone who sells on. So essentially, what are we going to do about that? What we've agreed is that we will only work with suppliers who can be open and transparent with us about the supply chain behind that. And to date, we have managed to do that, and we will continue to make that a very important part of Sophie, making relationships with providers. Some of them scratched their heads a little when we started asking the questions, because very often people assume that there will be no issue there, particularly if something has an organic label, which we don't always go for. But organic, importantly, means the land may have been cared for, but what about those people? So what I would say to you is we would go even further than the question that you have asked to try to ensure that everything that we put out through Sophie is good for people back up the supply chain, just as we hope that it will help and support people out in the world who are buying it.
Absolutely. Now, we're already running towards the end of this conversation, and I actually prepared three some quick fire questions for you, some light-hearted questions for you. So the first question is for Kaveh, what were you afraid of as a child?
Amazing. Pools. I had a crazy fear of pools. I think some bad swimming lessons when I was 3 or 4 years old. I was the most hydrophobic kid you could ever imagine. Yeah.
And thank you. And Pamela, what is your favorite word in another language?
Oh, actually, it's one that really makes me laugh. So my husband is German, and a few years ago we were visiting family in Germany, and I saw this advertisement for an Auspuff, Auspuff, and I couldn't understand what on earth this word was. An outpuffer, basically, and it's the German word for exhaust.
Yeah, and there's always another beautiful German. And for both of you, if you hadn't worked with Sophie, what would you have pursued in life? So, Kaveh first.
So I'm sure I would have been doing something deep in the rainforest or something biodiversity or conservation oriented, because I just love that space.
Mm-hmm. Pamela?
I definitely, though it's the third time I've said it, I studied at university twice, and each time I said I really wanted to study archaeology. I didn't manage it either time. I feel like my knees might not be up to that anymore, though.
And finally, the floor is all yours. What should people take away from today's conversation? What's next for you, Pamela?
I feel like what I would love your listeners to take away is that you don't need to, is that at Sophie, we're trying to take away that need to go in to a health food shop and be completely blown away by the amount of choice that you have, by being asked to spend huge amounts of money and getting no result. We want to be able to hold people's hands through this process. And I hope that your listeners have taken away just how deeply we believe in what we're doing, and that really we do want to bring plants to the fore for people, because they can really, really help people change their lives around.
Absolutely. And Kaveh, remind us again that you're launching something special this coming September.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're activating pre-orders on our website on sophie.health. And we're basically looking at first customer shipments coming in November and December. And as you would expect with any of these supply chains, and particularly ethically minded ones, we have very small limited production. So we're super keen to reach audiences that genuinely want to change how they feel, are going to be there for us with the journey, and can't wait to turn the system on. And look, I would say the idea of reconnecting people and plants have had a history that is thousands of years old. It is the oldest technology in human health. We've used it forever. What we call modern medicine is a derivative of that. It's not it's super interesting. People think, well, there's real medicine and then there's the plant stuff. Mm-hmm. The thing is, the real medicine is a derivative of the plant stuff. Half of the prescribed medications people consume are directly the result of plants. And the idea that we can somehow activate these plants and map people's unique responses to them, and it's a consumer platform, so you don't need to wait for a doctor to write you a prescription. You're in control of it, not somebody who gifts you the opportunity. We think that's super cool, and we can't wait to see how it's picked up. But we're very grateful for the opportunity to share our story, and we're very thankful for your mind share and for your time in listening to us.
Absolutely. And it's been an insightful conversation with you, Kaveh Memari and Pamela Spence from Sophie. It's been a pleasure to have you here on the DRH show. And I look forward to hearing more about Sophie. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.